All right, working on a 2011 Chevy Malibu, and this vehicle has no compression. We're going to go ahead and replace a head gasket on this engine today, and we're going to go ahead and start the disassembly process. Of course, when you go to start disassembling this, you want to go ahead and make sure you disconnect your battery is your first. So disconnect your negative terminal. Of course, it's got a little corrosion on there. Go ahead, clean it up, disconnect it, and then we'll go ahead and start the disassembly of the air breather assembly, removing these screwdrivers, this clamp on this ventilation deal. You go ahead and disconnect this because we got to be able to get inside here because of the timing chain. So you're gonna go ahead and disconnect your master flow connector. You got a little bitty clamp that's down here by your throttle body. You got to go ahead and disconnect that, and then this cover. You go ahead and pull your oil cap. This cover is held on by little grommet deals that the little pins kind of sit in. So you'll be able to pop it up, but you gotta disconnect this first or you'll break that little rubber boot that's down here. So we're gonna go ahead and start this assembly process, remove this, and then start on the valve covers. So let's get the easy stuff done first. All right, with the air breather assembly removed, we went ahead and removed the air box assembly that sat here as well. It's now time to go ahead and start the removal of all the harness. Your intake manifold, all that's got to be disassembled, and also your exhaust manifold that's located on the back side of the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and the head gasket assembly is going to come with a bunch of gaskets from the head and up. So you could go ahead and remove the throttle body, intake, anything that's got a gasket in between it. The kit usually has all the gaskets in replacing. So if you got it all disassembled, might as well go ahead and replace it as well. So we're gonna go ahead and start the removal of all the harness, the fuel system, lie it off to the side. All right, as we progress forward on replacing the head gasket, we had to remove the coils, which I held on by 10mm screws. And also the variable valve solenoids, which are located right here. This is your exhaust, this is your intake. Both of these are held on by 10mm. So gonna have to remove these, and then all the 10mm screws that are wrapping around your valve cover. All the way around, along with your harness. Remember that harness that ran across here and then jumped over? You're gonna go ahead and disconnect it from around it and pull it over here and set it to the side. That way it's up and out of the way. Then your injectors are held on by two 10mm screws. Once you pop it, the rail should completely come directly out of the head itself, like so. So that way you don't have to worry about fuel. And then you're gonna go ahead and disconnect the harness that's held on right here, squeeze these little guys, push them down, and the rail will slide off to the side as well. That will get it out of the way. Then you're gonna go ahead and start working on the intake removal. And of course it's held on by 10mm screws. They're wrapped all around this intake. So of course you can see one down here, anywhere where there's an opening on the intake, you're gonna have one. So you're gonna go ahead and then remove that, remove the harness that's mounted on the bottom side. You gotta disconnect your dipstick tube from the intake, held on by multiple screws right here. Have a purge solenoid off to the side. That's actually mounted on your intake as well. And it's held on by a little bitty, you pull this little guy and this whole thing will slide right out. There's a little bitty spring wheel deal right here. So once you do that, that's going to clear it and you'll be able to remove it out. All right, with the fuel rails now out of the way, the valve cover has been completely removed. As you can see, the engine, this is a poor maintenance right here. So we're going to go ahead and when we get this head off, we're going to go ahead and clean all this up before your next oil change. This one, unfortunately, has been neglected from the previous owner. And we're going to go ahead and clean it up before we go ahead and put it all back together. But with that being said, the intake, as you can see, the 10mm bolts that hold it in place, went ahead and removed those. You got the fuel rail right here off to the side. It's out of the way. It's now working on removing the plastic panel down here. And this plastic piece is actually blocking. You actually have that covered down there. So this panel right here needs to be removed to access your timing cover, your Harmonic balancer, your belt. There's a timing chain tensioners located on the back side. We got to be able to access that. So it's you have to ensure you jack the vehicle up, place it on a jack stand, and go ahead and start the procedure removing of all this plastic components. You will, however, need this tool right here. They sell this at your local parts store to remove all your little plastic clips that's located in your fender well and up underneath the car as well. So we're gonna go ahead and get these plastic panels out of the way. And on this 2.4 engine, you got this purge solenoid sitting on the side and the wiring. You're gonna have to detach that from the head. They're held on by 13mm bolts off on the side. Once you remove that, it'll break that loose. And then you gotta get back here on the exhaust manifold. You have this cover, it's a heat shield. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. It's held on by 10mm bolts. We need to get inside here so we can go ahead and pull the exhaust manifold off. Pull that out of the way so we can go ahead and intake's already broke loose. There's nothing held on back front there. We're gonna have to remove this coolant hose and this motor mount. All right, so went ahead and got the cover pulled off. Of course, it's held on by 10mm screws. And then there is you got the 3 bolts that bolt to the catalytic converter. That's 15mm bolts. And then you have the bolts that go to the back of the head. These nuts are 13mm. So I went ahead and pulled all the bolts out, and that will allow the exhaust to pull off like so. And you're gonna have to maneuver it out of here. So the exhaust manifold is now out, and what you want to do is you want to inspect it. Oh, wow, look at that. That's split right here too. And down here. No, not that. This is actual crack though. Bad business. So I gotta go ahead and order a new one of those. Look at that. She's been cracked for a while. Start the process of trying to get in this timing cover area. And so what we gotta do is remove the belt. And you just use a 3/8 ratchet and get on the tensioner. It's located right here. I already got the ratchet inside there, and you got to go in a clockwise position like so to get the belt off. See, I was able to go clockwise with the ratchet, and now the belt is coming right off. All right, so now that the belt, go ahead and pull it off completely. There it is. So now that the belt's out of the way, the harmonic balancer is going to have to get removed by a harmonic balancer pulley kit. All right, it looks like that's 21mm. That's 21mm. Pop it right off. That is a very long bolt. Get the bolt out of the way. Now we need the tool, and you're gonna, of course, using a harmonic balancer tool, you need to use the little cone, place it in here, get the 3 bolts. It looks just like this. This is a cone that goes on the inside that presses against this, and of course you have multiple different sizes thread. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be this one that screws into the, yeah, screws right in like so. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the harmonic balancer off with this kit. Of course, this is a rental kit. You can pretty much go to any parts store and rent this kit out. Once you're done with it, you can go ahead and return it after you're done. I'm gonna go ahead and pop this off and then move on with the timing cover. All right, so I couldn't use the long bolts that came in the harmonic balancer kit, and so I went ahead and found some short bolts inside the shop. But while I'm turning this bolt, I'm not even using a socket, and our harmonic balancer is actually coming off. If you actually see, that's by hand. So obviously it's not on there by much pressure. You probably take 2 pry bars on each side of the harmonic balancer to get the thing off, but I don't know, I just wanted to show you it's actually coming apart by hand. So, and that I had to use shorter bolts and not the long ones. After the Harmonic balancer was able to come off, I went ahead and pulled the belt tensioner out. That was a 15mm bolt head that was on top. Used a wrench, popped it right off, and then removed all the 10mm bolts that wrapped on the timing cover. And I'm pretty sure there's 10 of them. And you see this little lip right here? These are usually the best places to go ahead and split it using a pry bar. While we're removing the timing cover, there's actually a bolt that's right underneath that little plate. It's 13mm bolt, and that is the last remaining bolt to remove the timing cover. But that bolt is so long it hits the frame of the car, so this motor is going to have to be dropped some. So I went ahead and placed the jack directly up underneath the oil pan to support it, and then you're going to have to remove this motor mount, and that's going to allow the motor to drop to where that bolt can actually slide out. That's 15mm, and this is 18mm bolts. So you remove those and pull the motor mount out of there. Get this motor mount out of here. Pull all these bolts out. You can also inspect the motor mount while you have it out too, just like so. You see it destroyed. It's kind of separating from what it looks like in there, so probably a good chance we'll just go ahead and replace it. And these are all your bolts. And so now that bolt that's down there, you see it right there, should be able to pop right out of there. A little more. There we go. There we go. So this bolt's kind of a pain in the butt, so you have to drop the motor mount off, pull that last bolt out. Now the timing cover should come right out. And there's your timing chain and everything. Alright, so the timing cover was hanging right here. See that little lip? It's kind of hanging around that motor mount. So, and this gasket was attached to the timing cover. So the cover is laying right here on the floor. Gonna have to clean it up. But visually inspecting everything, and notice there's a lot of broken parts. So for one, I got a broken piece that's popped right out. And yeah, there's a bolt just hanging right here, so obviously it must have vibrated itself out. Oh, it grinded itself. Yeah, that one's grinding down some. There's another broken piece right here. I don't know what this is. I just fell apart in my hand. Oh, look at that right here. So it's broken right there. So we're gonna have to put a new timing chain, set up everything in here in this vehicle. So while you go ahead and break everything down, it's a good time to take note what actually needs to be replaced. And in this case, a whole lot of chain. Oh, it's just slapping around, look at that. Probably jump timing too. So now with that done, we'll go ahead and start the removal. Since the timing chain is all sloppy seconds anyways, go ahead. All right, while looking on the top side, the motor mount was sitting right here. Went ahead and removed that. And you also have part of the motor mount bracket that mounted on the side of the engine block. You want to go ahead and remove that as well. There's a 13mm bolt that runs on the side, and the 3 bolts down here are 18mm. So once you remove those 4 bolts, it'll come out, slide out, and then just go ahead and sitting right there. Go ahead, pull it out, set it aside, and that'll allow you to remove the remaining of the timing cover gasket. Which the timing cover gasket sits right here. And because of this little hole right here, that's what that mount is. There's a bolt that runs through this hole right here, and it's keeping it from falling. So once you do that, it's then time to go ahead and remove the timing chain. These bolts up here are 18 millimeter. So you're gonna go ahead and remove these bolts. And then there's 10 millimeter bolts that are hiding back here. One right here and one underneath all this cooked up oil. That's from poor maintenance. Poor maintenance. So there's the other bolt right there. Remove that, that'll remove this bracket. And then down here, you should have a few other 10 millimeter bolts on the guides. And there's a tensioner. We go ahead and relieve the pressure. There is a bolt that's right here in the back. Right now, since this is all worn out, we're just gonna go ahead and pull everything apart. It's already off timing. It jumped time, so we're just gonna go ahead and pull everything off, and we'll retime everything when we go to put it back together. So you wanna go ahead and remove all this. As we get ready to go ahead and start removing the head bolts, there is by the timing chain, there's one right here, and there's one right there. Those are E12. It's a reverse torque type of bolt, so you'll need a Eco 12 socket to get those bolts out. So once you have them out, they'll look like this. But when you get a new head bolt kit, they'll have new bolts. You really don't want to reuse these bolts because they do stretch when you go to torque them down. And besides, this one got hit with the timing chain, as you can see. So we're going to go ahead and replace the bolts anyways. And the bolts that are on top of that hold the head to the block, those are 15 millimeter. Got one here, here, there. I mean, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bolts. So we're gonna go ahead and remove all those bolts, and the head should be ready to come out, and gotta get this one last clamp. Always double check your work. Make sure you go around the head. Remember, there is a cam positioning sensor right here, and there's also one in the back. Any grounds that might be attached to the head, ensure that everything is off before removal of the head. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, get the head off, and we're gonna inspect the valves. Moving the head, I didn't notice them at the beginning, but these were hidden underneath all of that sludge buildup. Ensure you get those 2 bolts as well. So there should be 4 of these reverse torque. They're E12 bolts. So make sure you get those and the 10 head bolts. Once you have those out, that'll give you access to go ahead and pull this head and do your inspection. This is one nasty head. Yeah. What's gonna have to happen is you give this thing a bath. But I want to first, before I go ahead and process anything like that, I want to go ahead and I'm going to clean this whole surface, and we're going to take a straight edge and straight edge right across here, because these things are kind of notorious for when they overheat, they bend. So then they'll need resurfacing. So we're going to go ahead and clean her up and do a inspection with the straight edge. If she's good, we'll go ahead and bath this thing up, make it pretty, get all that buildup out of there. Same thing on the engine side. You want to go ahead and clean the surface all around the head surface. Get any sludge buildup, coolant into the cylinders. Got to clean all the cylinders. Make sure they're all clean. On the side note, your catalytic converter, just shove like a paper towel or something inside there so the trash doesn't fall inside there. I'm gonna go ahead and get started on cleaning these, the head and the block, and see where we're at with that. All right, while cleaning the head, I went ahead and cleaned the exhaust side, the intake side, and the head side. But I'm right now, I was inspecting to see if there's any damages that might be on the head somewhere. Using a straight edge. You want to check to see if there's any warpage. Usually you can run a ruler across there and shine light up underneath it to see if light will shine through. If light shines through, I would recommend surfacing the head, so that way you don't have to unbolt it. If you had a coolant coming out your tailpipe or whatnot, this vehicle came in for a no run, and now I found what the problem was. The timing chain was the culprit on this vehicle, but on these engines are kind of notorious for, if they overheat, they warp. So you always want to double check, see if there's any warpage. If there's any warpage, get the head serviced and resurfaced, and then she should be good to go ahead and rebolt it back on and fire away. But just wanted to share with you, always inspect, make sure there's no there, kind of show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, see, there's like no light shining through it. So if there's no light, that means it's a good head. All I pretty much used was Scotch-Brite pads, and I just scrubbed on here, and the gasket pretty much came off. Same with this side and this side. So a little Scotch pad, a little B12 cleaner, cleaned it up good. Now it's time to go ahead and do the engine side. We progress forward with this timing chain on this Malibu. This is actually the inner chain where the water pump is. And then you have your two smaller sprockets. One's an intake exhaust, and then your crank. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and replace all the guides, tensioner, and put them in all in the right area. So what I usually do is I'll go ahead and turn this crank to this little pin is facing 6 o'clock. This guy up here is facing about 12 o'clock. This is your exhaust sprocket right here. He's going to face about 6, and then that one up here is going to face 12. So it should be a little notch, but as you can tell, the actual cover, this one, the cover is still there. This one actually cooked itself off. So there's a little bitty pin. You can kind of see it right there at the top. Barely able to see him, but he is facing 12 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and do, let me get that piece, a little broken piece out of there. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove all of these bolts that holds all of these sprockets. This sprocket comes out, this guy, tensioner, this one, this guy, and that one up there. Go ahead and remove this bolt too and get all these out of it. Now the water pump sprocket stays. He doesn't need to be clocked in any way, which direction. When we go ahead and put the chain on, it can go any way. But as far as the other three, they got to be in a certain order. So we're going to go ahead and start removing them. So you're looking at a 10 millimeter, 15 millimeter bolts to go ahead and remove these. So let's go ahead and get that done. And another way of telling that you are pretty much right, you want this top dead center. Cylinder number 1, you want it facing all the way at the top. So as you can see right here, he is all the way at the top. And that's what you want to go ahead and do. So also, while I had the free time, I went ahead and I cleaned the old head gasket, that the material that's left behind when you go ahead and separate the head. Go ahead and clean that to the best of ability to ensure a nice clean seal when we go ahead and put a new head gasket. Of course, this is a new head gasket, it's just sitting to the side right here, but we'll go ahead and get to the head gasket later after we go ahead and knock this chain out that's down here. What you want to kind of do is kind of keep the bolts. So if it came off the old tensioner, keep the bolts with the old tensioner until you're ready to put the new tensioner on. All right, so I went ahead and removed all the guides, the sprockets that are needed, as we're going to be replacing the majority of it except the water pump sprocket. That's the only one I didn't remove. So went ahead and got them all out, and they're pretty much laying on the floor. Now you got to remember, this vehicle, the timing chain pretty much broke, so I pretty much had slight difficulty trying to remove some of the bolts. As you can see, like this one right here, you notice that the bolt head actually got grinded pretty much off on that one. So we're gonna have to replace multiple components that are not in the kit. So we gotta make a special order and possibly order that on the internet or at a GM dealership. And as far as the rest of the components, that usually comes in the kit, which in this case, this is a milling kit. There's your part number, of course, right there. And pretty much got this at the local parts store. And of course, it comes with a new sprocket. This one goes on the bottom on the crank. That's the old one. New guides, new tensioner with a little pin. Make sure you don't remove that pin. As soon as we get the chain and everything's in place, then we'll go ahead and pull that last. You have your this one is your exhaust side. As you can see, exhaust, and there should be a little arrow right here by my thumb. This one right here should be the intake side. Of course, you can see intake, and there's the arrow right there. And this is the chain. Of course, your chain, you have a marking here, here, and this special marking. So each of these areas that are painted on here has a special location on the when we go to install it, so it all needs to go in this special place. So we'll go ahead and get started. Ready? So I'm gonna go ahead and get this area cleaned up a little bit. I went ahead and drilled this out, and I put a helicoil in here, so now the bolt will actually thread into that spot because it was actually bent and stripped. So besides that, I'm gonna go ahead and use this air tool. We've got to remember, this is an aluminum block, so you want to make sure you don't go too heavy and start digging into the metal itself. So I've got that little Scotch pad and using some B12. We'll go ahead and clean the whole surface all the way around, and any areas in which a bolt or any of the oil passages that run through it, or any coolant jackets. So I want to make sure everything's nice and clean before we go ahead and start pasting everything together. I'm going to use this little air tool, B12, a little Scotch bag, and get the scrubbing. I wanted to share with you guys on these sprockets. You want to ensure, don't put the guides on or the tension or any of that on until the chain has been put on. I tried to do that earlier. Just even one guide on here makes it a hassle just trying to get the chain on there. So ensure that the guides and all that's not installed until you get the chain in the proper area. So remember, everything has a little mark. So the bottom one, the chain, like they're color coded. See how that's color coded? Same with this one. It's got a little arrow right there. That's on the exhaust side, and then you have the intake side. The arrow's way on top. Of course, this one up here is special because the chain, if you look at it closely, it's got 3 colors. So make sure that arrow is in the center of those 2 yellow marks on that chain. And of course, the bottom has a 1 mark here, but on this one up here, it doesn't matter. There's no marking on the chain for the water pump, so it could go anywhere on that one. But Don't put the guides on until the chain's on. Now that the chain is on, I'm gonna go ahead and work on popping all the guides back on. So should be the long one, short one. You have the adjustable tensioner guide over here and the tensioner. So let's go ahead and get those popped on. Alrighty, so after installing the chain first and then followed with the guides, I then went ahead and installed the tensioner over here and have all the lines on the markings in the correct area. So right here on the intake, you got the little arrow, you got the 2 yellow keys and the black key in the center, so of course it's exactly in the center. Then over here on this side, it's the exhaust side. See right here, the arrow is facing down at 6 o'clock, whereas the intake is facing 12 o'clock. So they're almost exactly opposite from each direction. And the large crank, of course, the deal tells you front, it faces 6 o'clock at the little mark down here. And I went ahead and torqued all these bolts to 89 inch-pounds. So 89 inch-pounds on all these bolts all the way around. And then on this one and this one, it's 37 foot-pounds. But to do that, you would do it the same way as if you was to remove it with a punch. 5/32 in that little hole. You can see it right here. So you can put a 5/32 punch in there, line it up with the little pin right here, and then torque it down with the torque wrench, like I did earlier. Of course, it's 15 millimeter socket right there. Punch right here, hold it, and then torque it to 37 foot-pounds. I did it here, and the one on the other side. The other side, of course, is on the top. It's about 2 o'clock. That's where the hole's at, and that's where you're gonna go ahead and put the punch there, 5/32, 15 millimeter socket, and then torque this bolt down as well. So with that being said, it's been torqued down. I went ahead and pull this little pin that's on the tensioner out, because don't need it anymore. Now that it's all aligned, I always double check it. You can go, I would highly recommend going over it before moving on to the next stage. It's always good to double check your work. And now that this has been completed, we'll go ahead and move on to, of course, I'm doing a head gasket on this engine. That's going to be right after this, and then we'll move on to the large timing chain. So everything's been torqued down. It's good to go. Let's move on with the head gasket. So we're about to go ahead and start the head gasket installation process. Now that the timing chain in the lower area has been installed, I went ahead and came to the top side and cleaned the whole surface all the way around, ensuring a good connection between the head when we go ahead and torque this head down. Is this the same process you want to do on the head side? Just make sure you're not digging into it because it is made of aluminum. So you have to be patient. If it's a little on the rough side, I usually use a soft pad on an air tool and lightly go over it, ensuring it's good and clean and I'm not digging into the aluminum. So I went ahead and cleaned the head side, cleaned the exhaust side, and cleaned the intake side. So that way when I go ahead and install it, I'm not trying to clean it while it's installed in the car. So we're going to go ahead and install the head gasket. And of course, head gasket's right here. And this part, I actually got it off of eBay. And it came with these inverted bolts. You got the 4 bolts that run along here on the head and the head bolts themselves. I went ahead and put some Loctite on the bolts so they don't back off when we go ahead and torque them down. Got my torque tool, 15 millimeter. Up here, and these inverted bolts, I'm pretty sure is an E12 when we go ahead and torque these down. Now the torquing procedure, I got the head gasket here, is you're pretty much going to start in the center and work yourself out. There's a particular numeral order, and these 4 right here are your last ones.
when we go ahead and torque these bolts down, which are 15mm bolt heads, you're looking to torque these down at 22 foot-pounds, working yourself out all the way. Just these right here, not these 4. And then once we're done with that, we'll go back and mark them. 12 o'clock with a deal of whiteout. So right here. And the reason for that is because your next step requires you to do it in degrees. So you can go ahead and Google like a degree wheel, and you can kind of get the feeling of where your degrees are at. And in this case, we got to go 155 degrees after it's been torqued down 22 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque them all down to 22 foot-pounds and then go back at 12 o'clock and mark a nice little white dot on all these bolts at 12 o'clock, right? Then on the degree wheel, of course, you know, you can go 360 degrees. Half of the circle is 180, and if you want a quarter of it, it's 90 degrees. Well, looking up, Googling the degree wheel, 155 degrees from 12 o'clock is about 5 o'clock, because this is 180 degrees and 155 is about 5 o'clock. So we're gonna go ahead and pop this head gasket and pretty much just lay it, after the surface has been cleaned, right on top of the block. All right, pretty much just fits right on there. And then once that's on there, just pretty much grab the head, make sure the surface is clean, and we'll go ahead and pop this puppy on there. It's a little on the heavy side. All I did was look for these bolt holes, make sure they're all aligned. Make sure the back side's installed or fell flat. All right, so now the head has been plopped on there. It's now time to go ahead and pop the bolts in. Of course, you got these bolts. You should have 10 bolts, and they also have a home that's in the head. You just pretty much flop them all in. And of course, we're gonna tighten those down to 22 foot-pounds on the first pass. And this head was nasty. I had to do a lot of cleaning. All right, so now that those bolts are dropped in, I'm just going to use a basic tool and just drive them in until it stops. So, you know, these DeWalt's, it's a low torque. Just set it to like 11, just enough to drive it in. And then we'll start with the 22 foot-pounds pass. That it's stopping, it's not even reaching the bottom. So these things is just to help you, just to get it in there. That's it. Nothing fancy. All right, so now that that's in there, we're going to get the torque wrench. Again, it's 15mm, and we're going to have to set this torque, 22 foot-pounds. So I'm going to go ahead and set that right now. Now that we got the torque spec set at 22 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and start this torquing procedure. And this is pretty much how we're going to start the process. So starting from the center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, being that this is towards the timing chain on the passenger side. So I'm going to go ahead and start the torquing procedure. And let's get that done first. So
until it stops or until it clicks. That one clicked. So see, it's not much. That's number 2. So we're number 3. Number 4. As it's pulling the head down, these other bolts are becoming loose. So it takes a lot more to get to where the bolt is actually touching the head now, because it's pulling itself in. And that gasket I'm using is a multi-layer gasket, so number 7's over here. Number 8's way over here on the driver's side, front. Nine, and last but not least, number 10. All right. Now that those have all been torqued down to 22 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and take our white out. And at 12 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and put this. So think of the top side, or the head towards the cab of the vehicle to be the 12 o'clock mark. And then 6 o'clock is towards you. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all these, allowing me to go ahead and torque step number 2. Which is 155 degrees. That's what happens when you leave the head sitting out for a while. You start getting that surface rust. Lee. Well, I'm definitely going to have to lube this up before we go ahead and even turn this engine over. I have to get my light for this. All right, now that I went ahead and whited out all of that, we can now go ahead and do 155 degrees. If you can't think that you possibly might get it 255 or need the help, it's better to go ahead and just buy the degree wheel. And it's a pretty simple tool, but I'm going to go ahead and do it by viewing it and knowing exactly where the 155 mark is. So I'm going to go ahead and torque them down to 155 degrees, and then we'll go ahead and start on these inverted bolts, in which there's 4 bolts that's towards the timing chain, and we got to torque those down to 26 foot-pounds. There's 4 of them. That's an E12 bolt. So I'm going to go ahead and torque these down, then we'll move on to these. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and start working on these inverted bolts. Again, that is an E12. That's right here. And there's 4 of them. That's by the timing chain. One sits over here, here, and then in the back, right over here by my finger, right down here. And so what we need to do is we need to torque these down to 26 foot-pounds. And so I'm just going to drop them in and run it up with my little DeWalt drill. Of course, it's not set on full torque. So when it reaches to the bottom, it just clicks like that. In some areas I can't get to unless I use an extension. All right, now that those are all the way down, we'll go ahead and torque those. My torque wrench right here, of course, is set at 26. And stick that on the extension and start from the center. There it is, till it clicks. There it is. Let's do the next one. There it is. And the next one. And last but not least, there it is. So got all 4 of those inverted bolts now torqued down, 26 foot-pounds with the head bolts. First started from the center, and then torquing them down 20 foot-pounds, and then 155 degrees thereafter, and then 26 foot-pounds on these inverted bolts. So the head has been officially bolted down. We'll now go ahead and start the procedure with the timing chain on for the cams and everything. So we'll go ahead and get that kit and get started on that now. All right, that pretty much concludes part 1 of part 2 on this timing chain head gasket replacement on this 2011 Chevy Malibu. Now, of course, this is the inner chain. You have the 2 intake exhaust sprockets, you have the crank, and your tensioner. Your water pump sits over here. There's a guide here, here, and here, of course. And this is just a quick reference. And with that being said, we're pretty much going to be moving on to installing the larger chain and completing the rest of the installation of all of the parts. And if you guys like my video, please hit the like button. If you guys like to follow me, please hit the subscribe button down below. And as always, thanks for watching.